The living tradition which we share draws from many sources, including the words of deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront the powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and a transforming power of love. Clara Barton was a prophetic woman whose words speak to us today. Clarissa Harlow Barton was born on Christmas Day in 1821 in Oxford, Massachusetts. And in her long career of public service, she was successfully a teacher, a battlefield nurse, a lecturer, and finally organizer and president of the American Red Cross. She was a Universalist. Her parents were deeply involved in the founding of the Oxford Church, and she was born and raised there. Her minister was Jose Ballou. Those of you who were paying attention last week may recognize that name, that he was the mentor and then later nemesis of Aidan Ballou, because Jose Ballou was an ultra-universalist, believing absolutely that there would be no hell, no punishment after death. Someone asked Clara Barton about her religion, and in response she wrote, "Your belief that I am a Universalist is as correct as your belief in being one yourself, a belief which all who are privileged to possess it rejoice. In any case, it was a great gift, for like St. Paul, I was born free and saved the pain of reaching it through years of struggle and doubt. My father was a leader in building the church which Jose Ballou preached his first dedication sermon. Historic records will show the old Huguenot town of Oxford, Massachusetts, erected one, if not the first, Universalist Church of America. She stood in a new schoolhouse building which had been built at the cost of $4,000. I am off of page here. I am sorry. I need to collect my thoughts. There it is. I look anxiously for a time in the near future when the busy world will let me once more become a living part of its people, praising God for the advance of a liberal faith of the religious world today. So much is due to the teaching of this belief. The belief she speaks of is universalism. As a child, Clara played nurse, taking care of pets that were sick and injured. When she was 11, her brother fell from a barn roof, and she was his nurse throughout his 2-year convalescence. She became a teacher at 17 and taught in North Oxford for several years, and then enrolled in the female department of the Universalist Clinton Liberal Institute in New York State, receiving the finest education available for a woman at the time. Finally, she went to Bordentown, New Jersey, looking for a job. She found a dispirited group of boys with no school and offered to teach. The president of the Board of Education told her that the task was hopeless. The boys are renegades. Many of them are more fit for the penitentiary than school. A woman can do nothing with them. They wouldn't go to school if they had the chance, and their parents would never send them to a pauper school. You will have the respectable sentiment of the entire community against you, and you could never endure the disgrace that you will meet. A strong man would quail and give way under what he could be compelled to meet. And what could a woman, a young woman, and a stranger do? She told him, my only desire was to open and teach a school in Bordentown to which its outcast children could go and be taught. I would emphasize that desire by adding that I wish no salary. Reluctantly, the board agreed. She got on well, and at the end of 12 months, she stood in a schoolhouse building which had been built at a cost of $4,000, and 6 pupils had grown to 600, when she described as a bright, loving phalanx among whom never a punishment had been administered. She had established the first public school in New Jersey. Then came the ultimate insult. It was impossible for anyone to think that such a large institution could be run by a woman. Against the desire of the pupils, a male principal was appointed for the new school. For a few months, I tried to continue, she writes, but the man made it difficult for me. I could bear the ingratitude, but not the pettiness and jealousy of this principal under whom I was set to work. I may sometimes be willing to teach for nothing, but if paid at all, I shall never do a man's work for less than a man's pay. She then moved to Washington, D.C., worked at the Patent Office, but as the Civil War was underway, going to the train station to meet war-weary and wounded troops in Massachusetts, she became convinced that she had to go to the front lines to serve those who needed her help. The rest, they say, is history. She grew larger than life as the angel of the battlefield, a label she earned at the Battle of Cedar Mountain. Clara appeared at the field hospital at midnight with 4 mule team load of supplies. Surgeon Dunn wrote at the time, "I thought that night, if heaven ever sent out a holy angel, she must be the one. Her assistance was so timely." At Fredericksburg, she tended to the Confederate wounded, and then crossing the Rappahannock River on bridges shaken by artillery fire, went to help the Federals. A bursting shell tore her clothing. On another occasion, she tended a wounded soldier. A bullet tore through her dress, killing him instantly. After the war, she volunteered for the International Red Cross while on a trip in Europe in 1870, and helped refugees from the Franco-Prussian War in Paris and other cities. She returned to America in 1873 and then was invited by the international authorities to establish an American Red Cross, which she founded in Washington in 1881. She founded the first local chapter in Dansville, New York, and subsequently she spoke about the Red Cross in Rochester, New York, and her good friend, Susan B. Anthony, a member of that congregation, started the second chapter of the Red Cross in America. The connection of these 2 women was strong. In 1867, they attended the World Suffragette Conference together, and the relationship is illustrated in one of Clara Barton's most famous speeches. Her speech was advertised in a little town of Iowa thusly. And she said, "Soldiers, you have called me here to speak to you of the war we lived together, and I have done it, and now I have a word with you. I wish to read to you this paragraph which you have used to help fill this hall. We can promise our citizens a rare treat of patriotic eloquence, such as seldom listened to, and we can assure them that there will be no cause for disappointment. They will not have thrust upon them a lecture about women's rights after the style of Susan B. Anthony and her clique. Miss Barton does not belong to that class of woman." That paragraph, my comrades, she said, does worse than misrepresent me as a woman. It maligns my friends. It abuses the highest and bravest work ever done in this land for either you or me. You glorify the women who made their way to the front to reach you in misery and nursed you back to life. You call us angels. Who opened the way for women to go and made it possible? Who but that detested clique who through years of opposition, toil, and pain had openly claimed that women had rights and should have the privilege to exercise them. The right to her own property, to her own children, her own home, her just individual claim before the law, to her freedom of action, to her personal liberty. Upon this, other women claimed the right and took the courage, if only to go to an army camp and drag wounded men out of a trench and to save them for their families and country. And soldiers, for every woman's hand that ever cooled your fevered brow, stanched your bleeding wounds, gave food to your famishing bodies, or water to your parching lips, and called back to life your perishing bodies, you should bless God for Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Francis D. Gage, and their followers. Boys, 3 cheers for Susan Anthony. And they rose and cheered. In the late 1800s, there was a community being established north of D.C. called Glen Echo. It was called the Chautauqua Society. These were like little camps where people gathered to talk about peace in the New World and kind of intentional commune communities, although the type of commune communities that were being formed about 40 years ago by people like Aidan Ballou have since shown themselves not to work. So it was a different model of intentional community. And they asked Clara Barton to make her permanent residence there. And they built a 38-room house in which she lived in and established the headquarters building of the American Red Cross. And you can still go up to Glen Echo and visit that building today. And you can see her little tiny office, which is a little bit smaller than this area here. Clara Barton's Universalist beliefs had consequences. Outcast boys deserved an education, even if the town leaders had already condemned them. A wounded soldier needs care. She did not separate them into the camp of friend or enemy. She recognized their universal humanity. There are so many things that divide us in our present time: race, religion, social status. And occasionally it seems that the Civil War continues to this day. Our task is to find ways to overcome the barriers and to have courage not fear resistance, to be angels on the battlefields around us. And this work continues, even today. I'll be sending you an email of some of the groups that I'll be talking about. First is the American Red Cross. They still are very active today. They are active in helping soldiers and their families get financial aid, get trips back home, and get and leave and all that sort of thing, just to introduce some humanity to the war scene of our soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere around the world. The International Committee of the Red Cross is in Iraq visiting detainees. They visit detainees all over the world. They have been there without protection because they take no protection from governments, either from the insurgents or from the American governments. And they've lost 5 people over there. And they're part of the people who are watchdog groups over prisoners of war. And there are other groups around that I think this congregation could attach themselves to, either individually or as a congregation. Some of them are a little offbeat, and some of them have little specific things. Like there's an Operation Comfort, which seeks to find therapists for people who are returning from the front. We know a couple years ago in Fort Bragg, in a month, there was about 5 cases of domestic violence that ended in murder, just because the reentry into peacetime or into civilian life after the trauma of war is very difficult. And there's a thing you can either support money, or if those of you who are therapists yourself can offer time that you can connect with groups that help people make that transition. One that I think speaks particularly to UU sentiments is bocajava.com. Send the troops good coffee. Now, I never served in the military, and I've talked to people who have. The military is not known for its good coffee. But it's just a place to go to send something that's a piece of home to let the people over there know that they're not forgotten. It's something special. And here locally in Fort Bragg and across the country, there is a group called Operation Homefront that just works with the families that have been left behind. The provision, the salaries that our soldiers get are a pittance. For those who live off the base, they can hardly scratch out a living. And that there is so much need, both psychological and physical, that these families need, that there's a way for us to be involved. The term support our troops, which we see everywhere, really has more than just support the mission or support the plans of our government. It also involves supporting the people themselves. The people themselves who, for a variety of circumstances, have found themselves in a situation that is very difficult. How many people here just know someone personally who has been over in Iraq? There's a significant number, and there's a number of us who've been untouched by this. But to know that we need to put our commitment to peace and universalism and hope and care and compassion on the line. The responsive reading said it's easier to venerate heroes than to listen to them and act upon their ideals. We have a lot of people in this country who are hurting, and we can help. And I'll be sending these things out over the web, and my printer didn't work this morning, or you would have them in your bulletin. But we are here now, and we are standing in the tradition of universal compassion. Universal compassion that includes our soldiers and the people over in Iraq, the people who are being detained. It should contain the whole world. And it's a hard thing to do because we get caught up in the political fights of right and wrong and our opinions. But our opinions matter little if we don't see the people who are hurting and help them. May we bless and be blessed.
Freely have we received the gifts that minister to the needs of our body and our spirit. Gladly we bring to our church and its wide concerns a portion of this bounty. We will receive the morning offering at this time and listen to Erna play Bach's Partita No. 2. Thank you.